Amendment and Reauthorization Act of 1986, directed by OSHA to promulgate standards which would protect workers engaged in hazardous waste operations. This standard is unique in that it closes the regulatory loop when hazardous waste brings EPA, OSHA, and DOT into joint regulatory authority over hazardous waste operations. While OSHA in the past had authority, waste operations were not a targeted industry in terms of compliance monitoring. The standard changed their role and mandates interaction between the regulated bodies. Training is rapidly being recognized and relied upon as a means to ensure compliance with regulations and to operate in a manner which is consistent with protection of the environment as well as individual health and safety. The training requirements under 1910-120 are: workers on site but whose job will not result in exposures above permissible exposure limits, 24 hours and 1 day supervised field experience. 4, should workers from 2 or 3 become general workers engaged in cleanup operations, they will need an additional 16 hours training plus 2 additional days of experience. On-site direction of response. 6, all the above must receive annual refresher training of sufficient content. Employees conducting operations that remove contaminated materials must be
push it, fat face. I'm pushing you back.
Sometimes it's hard to pay attention during safety meetings. Hard to focus on accidents that don't happen or hazards that aren't visible. But what the man in there was trying to say is more than just a safety tip. It's a whole way of working, a new standard of protection for people who work with hazardous wastes. New training requirements have come from the government, and what they're concerned with is you. If you have to work with hazardous substances, you must do it with a minimum of risk to yourself, to other people, and to the environment. And the way to do this is with training.
Hazardous waste refers to waste chemicals that can do harm to humans or the environment. The hazardous part means they can ignite, corrode, react with something else, or be poisonous. Millions of tons of hazardous waste are generated each year, and there are very strict regulations governing its handling, transportation, and disposal. You'll be trained to safely handle hazardous materials, even though you may not think of yourself as a person who spends a lot of time working with chemical waste. The government has required that jobs be identified that can, at some time or another, put workers in close contact with these wastes. And your job may be one of those. You are joined by over 1.5 million other workers who will also be trained on the health and safety aspects of handling hazardous wastes and emergency response. Let's look at who's in this with you. People working in large cleanup operations are, of course, in the picture. These professionals go into places that have been identified as uncontrolled waste sites and clean them up. Such cleanup site people are doing some of the most important work of our time. They are modern heroes, given the job of making the land fit for living again. These people must be trained to protect themselves in the environments where they work. But that's not the end of it. A similar group of trained employees is working to see that waste generated by industry is managed properly. In-plant personnel who routinely handle hazardous waste generated and stored at the facility also need special training, because these workers handle spent chemicals on a daily basis. They may be at risk of exposure. For employees of hazardous waste treatment and disposal facilities, safety training is an ongoing process. These workers are involved with hazardous waste as it reaches the end of the line before disposal by landfilling, incineration, or other regulated means. A large group of workers needing proper training are those who we depend on in an emergency. Firefighters and others are often called to the scene during emergencies involving spilled chemicals. Their job is to keep an incident from becoming a catastrophe. In doing so, they